The envelope sat on my counter at 5 in the morning, propped against the register like it had waited there all night. It was the same soft cream color I use for wedding icing. My name was written across the front in handwriting I hadn't seen since I was 3 years old. Not my name exactly. A name I hadn't answered to in 28 years. I turned the ovens on first because that's what you do. My bakery smells like yeast and cold sugar before the sun comes up. And there's a comfort in that smell I've never explained to anyone. My name is Grace Morgan. I own this bakery outright on the corner of 5th and Willow, and I still sometimes say that sentence out loud just to believe it. My husband, Daniel, builds furniture 2 doors down. Most mornings he brings me coffee before either of us says a word, because he knows I don't have words yet. Our daughter, Ellie, is 11 months old. When I hold her, I understand all over again why I never went looking for anyone else. The people who raised me are Margaret and George Foster. They sold me this bakery for $1 and a promise to keep their sourdough starter alive. They are not my birth parents. They are the ones who stayed. I was 3 when my birth parents signed me over. I have one memory from before, or maybe just the ghost of one. A woman's hands buttoning my coat too fast, a car door, cold vinyl under my legs. Margaret told me the truth when I was 10, because she believed lies rot a family from the inside out. My birth parents had wanted a son, she said, and could only raise one child well. So they chose. She didn't soften it. She just held my hand while I did the math no child should have to do. I taught myself to bake instead. Bread doesn't care whether you were wanted. Bread only needs warmth, time, and someone paying attention. I could give it all 3. I got good enough that people started driving from 2 counties over for my croissants. I built a family that chose me back. Then, on a Tuesday like any other, an envelope the color of my own wedding cakes showed up on my counter, and the button coat feeling came back like it had never left. I opened it after the morning rush, in the back room where the mixer drowns out most feelings. The paper was heavy, the kind people buy to seem serious. Dearest Bella, it began, and my stomach dropped through the floor, because nobody has ever called me Bella. That was the name on a birth certificate I've never even held. She wrote that she thought of me every day. She wrote that fate had put me back in her heart. Then, 3 paragraphs in, wrapped in so much velvet I almost missed the blade, she asked me for $40,000. Not for herself, she was careful to say. For my brother. His name was Colin. He was 19, full of promise, and college was so expensive now. Family helps family, she wrote, underlining the word family twice. She signed it your mother, Vivian. As if that were a fact instead of something you have to earn. I sat on an overturned flour bucket and read it twice. $40,000, from a woman who once decided I was the child she could afford to lose. My hands were steady. I noticed that, and I noticed that I noticed because steady hands at a moment like that means something in you has already gone quiet and careful. I called my friend Rebecca on my lunch break. She's a paralegal, and she tells me the truth even when it costs her a slice of pie. I read her the letter standing in the alley behind my shop, apron still on. She was quiet for a second, then said the thing that should have set me free. When an adoption is finalized, Grace, it legally ends the whole relationship. She's not your mother in any way the law recognizes. You owe her nothing. I remember feeling almost light. Then Rebecca added the sentence that undid it. Legally, sure. But you and I both know that's not the account she thinks she's collecting on. I didn't answer because she was right. That account had no laws protecting it, only the soft, hopeful part of me that had spent 20 years wondering if a mother somewhere had cried too. I wrote back that night, kind and short, because kindness was a boundary I could actually hold. I said I had a full life and I wouldn't be sending money. I signed it Grace, not your daughter. Then I blocked the number at the bottom of the letter. Daniel watched me do it. He put his hand over mine and said, "You don't owe that woman anything. If she comes at you, she comes at both of us." I slept that night like the door had closed. It hadn't. 2 days later, Margaret called me at the shop, her voice thin in a way I hadn't heard since her last visit to the cardiologist. A woman had phoned the house asking for someone named Bella. Margaret told her there was no Bella at that number. "Oh, but there is," the woman had said. "She just goes by something else now. How's the bakery doing?" My hand tightened on the pastry bag until the seam split. I had blocked Vivian's number. I had told her nothing about my life. And still she had reached past me, straight to the softest people I had. A stranger who accepts no walks away. A stranger who circles behind you to find the weakest door is not asking. She's measuring the walls. That night I laid out a timeline on my kitchen table. And the thing that turned my stomach wasn't that she'd found me. It was when, 6 weeks after my bakery had been written up in the regional paper, photo and all, for quadrupling its wedding orders. 20 years of silence, and then the moment I looked worth something. A letter arrived calling me dearest. She hadn't forgotten me. She'd been watching, waiting for the girl she gave away to grow into something worth coming back for. 2 days after that, a second envelope arrived. Inside was a photograph, a boy 19 standing in front of a brick building, hands in his pockets, a half-smile aimed at whoever told him to smile. Colin. My brother. Vivian's note said he didn't know she'd reached out, that he was proud, that he was the family's hope. She'd learned that pleading for herself hadn't worked, so she'd put the boy in front of the money like a shield, knowing I wouldn't fire through a child. I turned the photo over because I always check the back of things. In different handwriting was a return address, not Vivian's town 3 hours away, but 1 county over. My birth mother's cousin. My Aunt Patricia. I'd met Patricia twice, both times by accident, always described as the neutral one. A card at Christmas, no questions asked. I called her that evening gently just to listen, because people who think you don't know anything will tell you everything. She answered warm as ever. And when I asked if she'd heard from Vivian lately, there was a pause, the kind a person takes when the true answer and the safe answer are fighting in their throat. Well, you know how she frets over you, Patricia finally said. I send her little updates so she stops worrying. She just wants to know you're happy. She said it like a kindness. She'd been feeding my birth mother information about my life for years. My schooling, my wedding, my bakery, my daughter. And she believed genuinely that she was doing me a favor. Blood is blood, she told me when I asked her to stop. I didn't yell. I just thanked her and hung up, and stood in my kitchen holding a dead phone. A little more alone than I'd been that morning. Vivian, having lost her quiet channel, didn't slow down. She got in her car. She came on a Thursday, my slow day, and parked a clean sedan across from my shop. She stood on the far sidewalk studying my building the way you study a house you used to live in. I recognized her before I knew her. The way you recognize your own chin on a stranger's face. She looked at the gold letters on my window, at me behind the counter with a piping bag in my hand, and something crossed her face I didn't want to read. Then she got back in the car and drove away. She hadn't come for nothing. An hour later, Margaret called, her voice shaking. A woman had left an envelope in her mailbox, cream-colored, addressed not to Margaret but to Bella. I caught up with Vivian at the light before the highway, because our town only has one road out. I rolled down my window and for the first time in 28 years, I looked my birth mother in the eye. My name is Grace, I told her. You need to stop going to my parents' house. She recovered fast, made her voice gentle, laid a hook in every sentence. I only want what's best for this family. I gave you a better life than I could. Don't you think you owe the family that gave you the chance? The light turned green. A truck honked behind us. I rolled up my window and drove away, but through the glass I caught her last words, aimed straight at the one thing I couldn't armor. She'd called Ellie her grandbaby. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the nursery floor while my daughter slept, feeling the specific exhaustion of holding a door shut against someone stronger than the lock. Daniel sat beside me and just said, "We're okay," over and over until I could breathe. That's when the phone rang. The bakery's after-hours line. Nobody calls that line at night. It was George. His voice was wrong. "Grace," he said, "your mother's in the hospital." I don't remember the drive to the hospital, only the parking lot, only running. Margaret was in a bed with wires on her chest and an oxygen line under her nose, small in a way I refused to accept. George sat in the corner chair looking a decade older than he had that morning. A cardiac event, the doctor said. Mild, caught early. She'd be fine with rest and no stress. He said the words no stress while reading a chart, not knowing he just prescribed the one thing my family could no longer guarantee. When I got George alone in the hallway, he told me what happened, and something in me went cold and still. Vivian had come to the house that afternoon. After the mailbox she'd knocked. And Margaret, who is polite, who I had told 100 times not to open that door, had opened it. Vivian had stood on the porch and said the thing that got past every wall Margaret had. "You've had her 30 years. You owe me the daughter you got to keep." She told a woman with a failing heart that she was a thief. And Margaret had stood in her own doorway and absorbed it until her chest seized. I sat by her bed all night. Near dawn she woke, found my hand and whispered, "Don't let her take you from me," as if she were the one being stolen. In the morning, George handed me the mail he'd grabbed in his rush out the door. Bills, a grocery flyer, and riding along by accident, the cream envelope from the mailbox. It sat on my mother's lap in her hospital gown, and her hand rested on top of it, shaking, not from the envelope, just from being 71 and tired and hooked to a monitor. I took it off her lap so she wouldn't have to hold it another second. And I made a decision that felt like stepping off a ledge. I was going to drive the 3 hours to Vivian City myself. Not to pay. To find out what $40,000 was really for, because whatever this was, it wasn't a boy's tuition. I found the address from the letter and parked across the street, the way she'd once parked across from my shop. Before I could reach the door, it opened and a teenager came down the steps carrying a duffel bag. Tall, unsure, with a chin I'd have known anywhere, because I see it in my own mirror. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked. The ma'am nearly undid me. "My name is Grace," I said. "I think Vivian is my mother too." Color drained from his face in real time. "I had a sister," he said, more to himself than to me. "Mom said there was a baby before me. She said it didn't work out." It didn't work out. That was the phrase she'd given him for handing me to strangers. Like a recipe. Like a business. I asked him gently if he was excited about college. He looked at me like I'd spoken another language. What college? He wasn't enrolled anywhere. Nobody had asked him about tuition. He'd finished high school in the spring and wanted to do a welding apprenticeship. He was good with his hands, but his mother wanted him to go to a real school, and he didn't want to fight her, so he'd just been working at the auto shop and hoping she'd let it drop. He had no idea a woman 3 hours away was being asked for $40,000 in his name. When I told him, careful and quiet, his face did something complicated. Not surprise exactly. Shame. The specific shame of a kid who's spent his life being spent as currency, and just watched it happen again in front of a stranger who shares his chin. Then the door opened and Vivian stepped onto the porch and saw us together, and her face fell straight through the floor. For one unguarded second I saw pure panic, the look of a woman whose two separate stories had just met each other in the yard. Then the mask slid back on. "Colin, honey, put your bag inside. Let me talk to our guest." Not Bella. Not Grace. Our guest. Stripping me of even a name in front of him. She steered me inside for coffee, and while her back was turned filling the kettle, I let my eyes go where a baker's eyes always go, to the counter, to the papers pushed to the edge of the table, the ones you hide from a guest. Envelopes with plastic windows. The kind of mail that means someone owes someone. She stepped out to take a call. The second the screen door clapped shut, Colin slipped back into the kitchen and sat across from me, talking fast and low. He didn't want college. He'd said it a dozen ways and she never heard it. What he wanted was a 9-month welding program 2 towns over. A real trade, a real paycheck. He'd saved part of the cost himself. It was a fraction of $40,000. A small honest number for a small honest dream. Every time he brought it up, he said, she'd get a disappointed look and start talking about the sister who threw away her chances. Meaning me. The warning I'd become without ever being in the room. We had maybe 9 minutes. He told me the bills were hers, not his. I looked at the top one before she came back. Not a tuition statement. A past due notice, the amount circled in the same looping hand that had written Dearest Bella. Under it, more. A collections letter, a personal loan in Vivian's name, and at the bottom, a note about wedding gift money she'd promised a cousin's family in front of everyone and never paid. It clicked into a shape I hadn't expected. The $40,000 was never for Colin. It was Vivian's debts, her reputation, the appearances she couldn't afford to keep up, wrapped in a boy's name because she knew I'd never fire through a child. She came back in bright as anything. So, have you thought about how you'd like to send it? I'd been carrying a compromise in my back pocket for 2 weeks. Send the money anyway, call it a gift to Colin, launder it clean of her grip through sheer intention. That plan died right there at her kitchen table. There was no clean version. Every dollar would land on the past due notice, the wedding debt, the machine that discarded me and was now crushing my brother. I need to think, I said and stood to leave. Her warmth curdled into something older and harder. You owe me. I carried you. I gave you to people who could do better because I loved you enough to lose you. The least you can do is not let this family drown. Then, I already told the family you'd help. At the reunion. So you see you have to, because if you don't they'll all know what kind of person you turned out to be. She'd built a room. A whole extended family gathered Sunday to witness. If I refused in private, she could survive it. If I refused in public, the shame would do the collecting her letters couldn't. You'll come, she said. It wasn't a question. Because if you don't Bella, I'll simply tell them the story myself. How the daughter I sacrificed everything for grew up cold, and turned her back on the family that gave her the chance. I drove home 3 hours in the dark and didn't fall apart. Something in me got very clear instead. She'd built a room. Fine. I would decide what happened in it. The next morning I called Rebecca, who connected me with an attorney who set up education trusts, the kind of careful, boring legal instrument nobody thinks about until it saves someone. I wanted money set aside for Colin, locked, released only for verified educational or vocational costs, paid straight to the school or the tool supplier, never as cash into anyone's hands. Not touchable by Vivian. Not divertible to a debt. Only ever the thing it was for. The beneficiary has to want it, the attorney said. Knowingly. I reached Colin at the auto shop on his break. I told him the truth plainly, that the money his mother wanted was for her debts, not his future. I watched, even over a bad phone line, how that news both hurt him and freed him. Then I told him what I wanted to do instead. He went quiet for a long moment. Nobody's ever asked me what I wanted before, he finally said. You're the first person who asked me what I wanted. I had to lean against the wall to stay standing. The night before the reunion, I visited Margaret, home now, slow but herself. She took my hand across the table and told me something instead of telling me to be careful. You spent your whole life thinking you had to earn your way in here, she said. You don't earn family, Grace. You get kept for being ours. George had told me almost the same thing once, wiping his hands over a bowl of proofing dough. They'd agreed in their quiet way that I'd need to hear it twice. I drove the 3 hours again the next day in my good coat with a cream envelope in my bag. The same shade Vivian used, chosen on purpose. Not a check. Something else. The house was full when I arrived. Cars up and down the block, windows warm and yellow. Vivian's face bloomed with triumph when she opened the door. To her, my coming could only mean I'd folded. Dinner was a performance. She seated me where everyone could see me, called me Bella in front of the aunts, told a cousin how proud she was of how well I'd done, as if she'd raised me herself. When the food came around, she served Colin first. An old reflex nobody at that table questioned. The son fed first. Always the boy who mattered. It was an elderly great-aunt, loosened by wine, who cracked the door on Vivian without meaning to. She patted my hand and told the table how hard Vivian had had it as a girl, raised in a house where the boys got schooling and the girl got chores, told plainly that a daughter's job was to marry well and produce sons, that a girl who couldn't manage that was a field that wouldn't take seed. Times were hard, the old woman said, not knowing she was describing me, and Vivian did what she thought she had to. The table murmured, sympathetic. I sat very still, watching the whole machine reveal its gears. Vivian hadn't invented the rule that discarded me. She'd been raised inside it, swallowed it so young it became the water she swam in. I felt, for one unwelcome second, something like sympathy for the girl she'd been. Then Vivian stood, tapped her wine glass, and the table hushed. She talked about family, about sacrifice, and turned to me with the wet warmth of a woman about to spend her daughter in public. My Bella has generously agreed to help this family in our time of need. Especially her brother. Isn't that right, dear? Every face turned to me, kind and expectant, waiting for the grateful daughter to confirm her own generosity. I set down my fork and stood. I reached into my bag and Vivian's face flooded with victory. To her, a woman reaching for an envelope could only mean one thing. Thank you, I said, and meant it as a closing, not an opening. Then, level as a countertop, I told them all the truth. Not Bradley's education. There is no college. He never enrolled anywhere. He'd like to learn a trade, and no one in this house has ever asked him. The $40,000 was for past due loans and collections. I looked at the wedding cousins. And gift money that was promised and never paid. The warm room went cold in stages. Vivian's mask didn't slip, it shattered. You ungrateful. After everything I gave up for you. I stayed in my chair, hands still on the table. You didn't give me away, Vivian. You gave me back. There's a difference and I finally know it. I opened the envelope and set the trust papers on the table where the light could catch them. This is money for Colin. Enough for the welding program he actually wants and then some. It's held by a trust, managed by someone outside this family. It can only ever be released for his education and his training. Not for debts. Not for gifts. Not for anyone's reputation. I looked at her. It cannot be given to you or borrowed against, or spent on anything but him. Ever. The room was dead silent. Colin stared at the papers like a language he'd waited his whole life to read. Vivian stood so fast her chair went over. You can't do this. I sacrificed my own child so you could have more. You owe this family. You owe me. I didn't match her volume. I only answered her. I will not give you $1. Not now, not ever. This is the last time you'll see me. Then Colin did the bravest thing I saw all night. He picked up the papers, chair scraping back, and stood. I want the welding program, he said, voice cracking and holding anyway. That's what I've always wanted. Then quieter to his mother. She asked me what I wanted, Mom. You never did. It was the first time I think that anyone in that room had chosen me over her. I put my hand on his shoulder once, the way George does with mine, and I said goodbye to him, only to him, and walked out through a room full of people who shared my blood and not my life. I didn't look back at the house. I had spent 28 years looking back at it, wondering if a light was on for me. Now I knew there had never been a light. Only a ledger. And I was closing the book for good. Daniel had the porch light on when I got home near midnight. Ellie was asleep. He didn't ask how it went. He looked at my face and just held me in the kitchen while soup went cold on the stove. Colin started the welding program that fall. He sends me pictures now, sparks steal a grin that reaches his eyes. He came to the bakery once, 3 hours in his own car, and George taught him to shape a boule. Vivian never wrote again. I hear, through what's left of the grapevine, that she still tells her version, that her ungrateful daughter turned cold and abandoned them. I've made my peace with that. I didn't dismantle the machine. I just stopped feeding it and I pulled my brother out of its gears. Ellie is walking now. She stands on a stool at my elbow with flour on her nose, patting dough with serious little hands, and she has no idea she's the whole point. She will never audition for her place at our table. She was born holding it. I spent my whole life trying to be useful enough to keep. It turns out the people who actually love you never once do the math.